Hello again, folks. Splendid to see you. Thank you for coming across for the deep dive. And I see what lots of people already watching. If you're watching later on, though, of course, you're all very, very welcome. Now, there's a bit of background noise, so I've got a fan on in here. It's got a little bit on the warm side, but I do have a special machine on the way, courtesy of the wonderful people at SIC, having done some fundraising for an air conditioner. Bless them. So looking forward to that. In the meantime, there'll just be a bit of a hum in the background, but when we're listening to the nice music, I'll turn it down. Now, I've got a couple of quick questions in the comments here, which I'd like to just get to. First of all, I just have to do just a teensy bit of just sorting out of my computer here, because it's just having a little moment. The last thing I want to happen is for there to be a problem with our broadcast. So I'm closing that and that and that and that. Yes, that'll be the problem. Zoom. Okay. So Dorothy's got a question, I think, about the piece we just learnt, the Stabat Mater Dolorosa. Why didn't I ornament the filius? Musically, I feel it doesn't need it when you're coming up, and this is just very much referring to the last broadcast. But when you've already got a suspension to cadence, you don't necessarily need it. You also have the fact that you're singing about filius, the son. And you don't want to make that particularly overly emotional. If you're talking about lacrimosa and dolorosa and so on, you're talking about crying and sadness, that can be stretched out in this style. I think more will be clear or made clear through the session, everyone. But that was a really good question. Now, let's get started. Shall we just check that everyone can see and hear me all right? Good. Let me just double check that I can see myself. Because some people are saying, looking forward to seeing Ben on screen, and that's always a red flag. I'll just check I have pressed the button. It has happened in the past. Good. Yep, I can see and hear myself. All right, marvellous. So, everyone, welcome to our fourth in this series, looking at the great works. And last week we were looking at some music by Henry Purcell, wonderful composer of Baroque music. I'm just going to sneak this off, it's getting a bit distracting. And today is another piece of Baroque beauty, but later. Okay, this music was composed in 1736, whereas, of course, Dionysus was composed in the late 17th century. And so there's a distance of about 30, 40 years in between the composition of the two. But this is a very operatic piece, as we'll discover. We're going to need to meet our main man today. It's this chap here. And this is Palestrina, goodness me, Pergolesi himself, Giovanni Battista Pergolesi, or to give him his proper name, Giovanni Battista Draghi. That was actually his surname. Pergolesi is a nickname given to him, and this, as was the tradition, he's been given this nickname because this is the area of Pergola where his family were from, but he himself was actually Giovanni Battista Draghi. Now his dates, if you look on the score that we were singing from a moment ago, those of you that were at Classical and Trad, you'll kind of blink. Really? 1710, 1736. 26 years old he died of TB. And it's a huge loss to the world of music. He's an immensely important composer. He didn't write a huge amount of music in his short life. What he did, though, was hugely influential, both as an opera composer and as a composer of church music. Now, some of you who sing with Self-Isolation Choir will have been learning a Magnificat, which was started effectively by Pergolesi and finished by Durante. But he was best known for two main works. Now, one of them is the Stabat Mater, which is the focus of today's deep dive, and the other one is called La Serva Padrona, which is translated as the servant turned mistress, and it's a rather cheeky little piece. It's best thought of as a comic opera, and that's why he's so important. He basically was an early example of this Italian comic opera style, which was so important to the composers of opera in the 18th century and beyond, in particular Mr. Mozart. But we'll talk more about that in a minute. Now, he's a composer, also a violinist and an organist, and that is going to be very important as we go through, because there's an important element of style which I've been hinting at all the way through today's earlier broadcast, and Pergolesi is a master of this particular style. But let's talk more about him. So he was born in, as I say, 1710 in the province of Ancona. Was given the nickname, as I say, Pergolesi, because his ancestors came from Pergola. He studied music in Naples, attended the conservatory there, and left in 1731. When he was 21. He spent much of his brief life post-conservatory working for various noblemen, including Ferdinando Colonna, who was the Prince of Stigliano, and Domenico Marzior Carafa, the Duke of Maddaloni. And now these were both important, rich patrons, so it was very clear that he was a talented musician with a bright future ahead of him. And as I've already said in earlier on here, he was one of the most important early composers of something called opera buffa. Okay, now if you have studied opera at all and you've looked at the 17th and 18th centuries, you'll see these two styles emerging: opera buffa, opera seria. Now, opera seria is serious opera. It's the kind of thing that was written by, the early composers of opera, Monteverdi and so on, and by the French composers Lully and Rameau. And this looks at serious themes and isn't designed in any way to raise a smile. But of course, opera, by the time of Pergolesi, had been around for 100 years or more, really, almost. And so people wanted different styles, wanted to go to the opera and laugh as well as cry. And so his opera seria, as I say, La Serva Padrona, was a very, very popular work. That was completed in 1733, only 3 years before he died. And this piece in particular, The Servant Turned Mistress, when it was first performed in Paris in 1752, it caused an enormous fracas, absolutely enormous. It was known as the Querelle des Buffons, otherwise known as the Quarrel of the Comic Actors. And this caused in some cases, actual punch-ups between fans of opera seria and opera buffa, fans of the work of Rameau and Lully, who composed these serious operas, as I say, and people who held up Pergolesi's work as an example of what could be achieved, this new Italian comic style. And it divided Paris's musical community for a full 2 years, this argument. But what's vital about it is that that this established this idea of opera, which didn't take itself too seriously, was a way of engaging with a wider audience. Because, of course, opera seria was for the posh folks. Yeah, very much for the nobles, for the rich patrons, and for the everyman, the person who wanted to go along, every man and every woman wanted to go along and see opera. They didn't want to sit there through, lofty ideals and morals and making them feel, also it's a bit like sort of the Oscar-worthy films. Some people just want to go along and see something that makes them laugh. This is vital, of course, for what happened later on in the 18th century in Paris. And in many ways, music was a conduit for the revolution that was to follow in 1789. Mozart loved opera buffa and used an awful lot of the influence of Pergolesi in his composition of things like The Marriage of Figaro, which itself was a subversive opera. So Pergolesi is a massively important composer when it comes to opera. One of the reasons why I've decided to put it on this week in kind of in tandem with SIC's course. But we're here to talk about the Stabat Mater, which was obviously a sacred work. Now, the Stabat Mater is a sequence, a series of poems written in the 13th century. It's a Franciscan text, and it basically is a reflection, meditation on the grief of Mary at the cross. Now, his Stabat Mater is, without doubt, Pergolesi's best-known work and probably the most performed. Originally written for soprano, that is female soprano, male alto, generally speaking, countertenor, strings, so violins, viola, and basso continuo. And many of you know what that is, but that's basically cello, bass, and a keyboard instrument that will hold everything together. Sometimes an organ, sometimes it might be a harpsichord. Can also, having said keyboard, can also be a lute or a theorbo, stringed guitar type instrument. It was commissioned by, got to read this, the Confraternita dei Cavalieri di San Luigi di Palazzo, which was a committee of well-meaning nobles who would present an annual Good Friday reflection and meditation in honor of the Virgin Mary. And Pergolesi's work replaced one that had only been composed 9 years before by Alessandro Scarlatti, who is another prominent Baroque composer. Basically, Scarlatti had produced a very nice piece, but it was a bit old-fashioned, even when it had been written. And Pergolesi brought to the table some new ideas, some new styles, which were very forward-thinking, or looking ahead to the classical era. And when you listen to some of these movements as I play them, those of you that are familiar with the Mozart Requiem will go, that sounds very much like Mozart. And Pergolesi's writing is directly influential on our friend Wolfgang. So the classical approach is something that Pergolesi introduced into the style, and the work has remained popular ever since it was written. It's been arranged by a number of other composers, most notably by Johann Sebastian Bach, who took the piece entire, removed the text, and put a non-Marian text in place, obviously for the Protestant Church. And it's called, again, I'm going to read this, Tilge höchste meine Sünden. I hope I said that right, Sünden, with the umlauts. Root out my sins, highest ones. That's BWV 1083. If you look it up, there's a lovely performance here on YouTube. It is basically the entire Stabat Mater, but with a non-Marian text. It's a very, very popular, very well-known piece. Now, tragically, Pergolesi, as I say, died at 26, and this was the last piece he completed. So very much in line with Mozart writing his Requiem, knowing he was dying, Pergolesi suffered from tuberculosis in the last year of his life, and he worked in a Franciscan monastery on this piece, along with his Salve Regina, and he finished the Stabat Mater about 2 days before he died. So it was absolutely the last piece he worked on. It's been celebrated throughout history, as I've said. Some people, however, didn't like it. A chap called Padre Martini criticized its operatic style in 1774, a full 40 years after it was composed, saying it was too similar to his other comic works to adequately deliver the pathos of the text. Now, if I'm honest, I can't think of any more appropriate style than Pergolesi's for this lovely, lovely piece. Okay, so let's dive in. Let's have a look. So the work itself is split into 12 movements, which follows the text of the Stabat Mater, and several of these movements run one into the other. Quies homo, for example, and pro precatis sui gentis run into each other, and the last two movements, quando corpus morietur and amen, run one into the other. The majority of the movements are in the minor key, as you'd expect for something as mournful and as beautiful as a Stabat Mater. There are, however, some slightly more jocular sounding movements where you have a little interlude. It's still the same reflective, sad text, but he set it to a major key, perhaps a slightly more upbeat. So, for example, the fourth movement is Allegro and is in E flat major. I remember singing that one when I was a treble. Lots and lots of fun to sing, actually. And I think this is perhaps why Martini thought it was a bit on the light side. Now, if we just quickly look at the text, so we have the Latin here and a translation. Stabat Mater Dolorosa juxta crucem lacrimosa dum pendebat filius. As someone said, that's easy for me to say. The grieving mother stood weeping beside the cross where her son was hanging. The words of the text demand a theatrical approach. They demand an emotive and intense approach, and Pergolesi absolutely understood that, in the same way that Handel learnt from this style, this particular technique, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. It's worth having a look through and looking up the text and reading the translation if you're subsequently going to listen to recordings of this, and I really would urge you to listen to a complete recording. It's only about 40 minutes, just like Dido and Aeneas. Absolutely sublime. At the very end, the last movement, which we'll be listening to in a moment, quando corpus morietur, when my body dies, grant that to my soul is given the glory of paradise. Amen. This was the last piece that this young lad wrote. He was 26 and dying, and knew he was dying, and he set these words to music. It was the last thing he ever did. When we listen, it's almost unbearably moving, and when you hear Mozart's Requiem, you will hear direct parallels, particularly in the in that wonderful, wonderful Lacrimosa, so much taken from Pergolesi's work here. All right, now I want to talk to you very quickly about this style that I've been hinting at, where you have this incredibly intense clash which resolves to another clash and to another and to another. It's a very Italianate style. If you've listened to any of the music that we've put on this channel, on SIC, by Italian composers, so the Durante, Vivaldi, Gloria, you'll hear this. You'll also hear it, as I say, in the Pergolesi, and throughout a lot of instrumental music. So durezza e ligature style. Okay, so durezza means literally harshness or hardness. So that is these clashes. Okay, but ligature refers in this case to legato, refers to smoothness. So it's harshness in a smooth way. So it's not just a single suspension on its own. It's a suspension which resolves artfully and carefully into another, into another, into another. So you get this sort of cascading feeling of absolute beauty. And, Pergolesi is not the chap who invented it by any means. We've already discussed, I'll play you a little bit in a minute, of the Lotti's Crucifixus, where you have this style employed. It's not used lightly. It's not used in a jocular way. It's used to show intense emotion in a way that Italian culture and Italian music demanded. It's very interesting, actually, when you look at the different national approaches to music in the Baroque era. As I've said before in other settings, the Handel's take on the English approach is you've got to have a really good tune that hits you directly on the eardrum, that you can beat time to. The German approach and the Austrian approach was highly contrapuntal, lots and lots of interweaving lines, form and structure, and beauty within a very rigid set of rules. The Italian approach is very much guided by the emotion, very much guided by these intense clashes that and wide leaps to sort of suggest high emotion. And this style's very, very popular and found a lot in organ music and also in string music. And if you've just listened to the sound of the organ, you can hear that because these notes can carry on as long as you like, you can just get away with just having one suspension after the other. You don't have to take a breath. You don't have that situation with a harpsichord that once you've played it, the note dies. You can hold that note and it gets more and more intense. Even with strings, you have to change bows, but an organ, you can do this. So organ music of the period uses a lot of this durezza e ligature style. As I've said here, dissonances that resolve into new dissonances with a smooth feel. All right. And often what you'll end up with is, particularly with skilled composers, where they will set out in this style and they won't resolve anything for a good long while. Let's have a listen to this Crucifixus, just the opening few bars. And so this comes from a longer credo by Antonio Lotti. Those of you that didn't sing this with me with SIC, we will do this one later on in the year on Homechoir. I just want to leave an appropriate amount of time from SIC. But this is from the middle of this creed, and you'll hear exactly what I mean about the durezza e ligature style, the overlapping, cascading, intense emotions. Here we go. Turn that back up. So you got that sense of just that one clash on top of another, delaying the resolution until the end. So this, when you hear that, particularly in Baroque music, dureza e ligature style. It's an Italian style, and so that's why Handel, having worked in Italy, that's why he uses this in his pieces to such extent. Think about the middle of Messiah. He was wounded for our transgressions. That's in this style. All right, everyone. Now, let's have a look at some actual music from this gorgeous, gorgeous work. So I'm going to going to be small Ben for a little bit. Now we've sung along with a version with me singing and with the home choir organ here, but let's have a little bit of the opening movement one more time with professional singers and with an actual orchestra. When you hear the violin parts and the viola sort of interweaving, it's so intense. Let's have a little bit of the opening of the Stabat Mater. Here we go. This is all to delay the resolution. And it doesn't resolve, it interrupts. Does it again. Does it again. And resolves here. Now the clash starts. Wow, okay. Wonderful, wonderful. We will, of course, be listening to more of that as we go. So that's this first movement very much establishes the feel of the work itself. Now, as the work progresses, you have individual movements for soprano and alto. You have some wonderful moments where they sing together. I'd want to focus on these moments where they sing together. So just bear with me a moment whilst I scroll through and find it. There we are. Okay, so this one comes from around the middle of the piece, and things are moving a little faster here. Here we go. Let's turn it back up. But you'll hear how the clashes and this dureza e ligature style is really working. Here we go. You see the use of the da 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 da, all these semitones everywhere, even in the bass line. You'll never get a chance in these intense movements to feel comfortable, to go, oh, well, this is nice, we're on firm territory, because at every possible stage, you're never more than a semitone away from absolute heartbreak. It's absolutely glorious and devastating at the same time. Now, I want to skip ahead because I see I'm almost out of time, which always happens in these deep dives. I want to look at the last movement here. And I would thoroughly recommend all of you, please, go and listen to a full performance of this. There are dozens on YouTube. Do try and find one that is relatively modern, that is to say, played on Baroque instruments, because that will be capturing, the purity of sound, the purity of playing. All these clashes work so much better if the number of string players is low. All right, you don't want a massive, great big symphony orchestra playing them. And if they're all playing with lots and lots of vibrato, it very much, I think, colours the sound. So the Baroque playing with the shorter bow and the purer notes which don't shake is exactly what you want. It's just glorious. So this is the last movement, Quando corpus modietur, and we're going to go all the way through it. It's about, what is it, 3 or 4 minutes. And what I want to do is those of you who know the Mozart Requiem and you know movements like Lacrimosa, listen to this. Okay, this is so reminiscent. When we get to the end, there is an incredible Amen, which will finish off our session today. It's fast, it's furious, and it's fugal. All the Fs. So here we go. This is Quando corpus modietur. Hopefully I've got this in the right place. There's a clash, and again, and again, and again. And doesn't this sound like Mozart? Now the soprano. So this is When My Body Dies. Grant my soul is given the glory of paradise. Alto responds. And now here come the clashes. There we are again, descending to clashing. Now here. Now to paradise. The glory of paradise. Interrupted. So this is almost the echo of this first movement, written by this young chap on his deathbed. And then this fiery, passionate Amen which follows. Such a contrast. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. I wish I could. In fact, what I'm going to start thinking about doing is taking a bit longer over these deep dives, perhaps in September, and doing this a full listen through of a work, because I just wish I could spend all afternoon talking to you about these pieces. But obviously you're all busy people. You've already spent an hour of your day with me, so thank you so much for coming along today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please do listen to the entire Stabat Mater. Those who are in SIC, I am actively campaigning to get us to do it. It will be next year. All right, it's not going to be any time in the busy schedule. And we'll do it next year if I can persuade Mark to do it. And I'm sure you'll agree it'll sound lovely. But in the meantime, everyone, we will sing that first movement on Sunday. When you're hearing all those lovely clashes, well, you know exactly what you're listening for. Dureza e ligature. Harsh clashes done smoothly. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Great to see you, everyone. And I'll see you on Friday for lots of fun. Don't forget, Ode to Cheese. It's going to be absolutely brilliant. Plus, we're going to sing There's a Hole in My Bucket and more besides. Only here on Homechoir can you get this range of music. So I will see you very, very soon, everyone. Have a great afternoon. If you're in the opera course, I'll see you later on. Otherwise, take care, folks. Bye-bye.